A coronal mass ejection left the Sun at 2,000 kilometers per second, and it is pointed at Earth. That is roughly 7.2 million kilometers an hour. A wall of magnetized plasma big enough to swallow this planet many times over, and it is already on its way. The stakes are not science fiction. Satellites, power grids, GPS, even the timing systems banks rely on. All of it sits inside the blast radius of a big enough space weather event. In the next few minutes, we are going to walk through what this eruption actually is, what happened the last time something like it hit us dead on, and the 3 numbers you should be watching over the next 48 hours. Stay with this one. It matters more than the aurora photos suggest. Start with the question everyone actually wants answered. Are we in danger? The answer is, it depends on orientation, and orientation is the part nobody explains well. A coronal mass ejection is not a beam. It is a bubble, an enormous cloud of plasma and tangled magnetic field flung outward from the Sun's corona during a solar flare, and it expands as it travels. By the time it reaches Earth, roughly 1 to 3 days after launch, depending on speed, that bubble can be tens of millions of kilometers across. Being aimed at us means Earth sits inside the cone of that expansion. It does not mean a laser-precise hit. That distinction matters, and we will come back to it. Here is the single most important thing to understand about why speed matters so much. A slow CME, moving at 400 or 500 kilometers per second, arrives gently. It nudges the magnetosphere. Auroras spread a little further from the poles, satellite operators log a note, and life continues. A CME moving at 2,000 kilometers per second is a different animal entirely. That is fast enough to punch through the solar wind ahead of it, compressing that slower material into a shock front, and shock fronts are where the real danger lives. It is the shock, not just the cloud itself, that can slam into Earth's magnetic field and set off a geomagnetic storm. Consider what that impact actually does, mechanically. Earth's magnetic field is not a static shield. It is more like a windsock, constantly reshaped by pressure from the solar wind. When a fast CME's magnetic field arrives with a southward orientation, opposite to Earth's own field, it links up with our magnetosphere in a process called reconnection. That is the mechanism that matters. Reconnection opens a temporary doorway, letting solar particles and energy pour into the magnetosphere far more efficiently than normal. Energy that would otherwise be deflected gets funneled downward, into the upper atmosphere, into the ionosphere, into the very currents that GPS and radio systems depend on. That is why scientists do not just watch the Sun. They watch the magnetometer readings once the shock arrives, tracking a number called the KP index, a 0 to 9 scale for geomagnetic disturbance. Anything above KP7 starts to matter for infrastructure. Anything near KP9 is severe. And there is a second, more technical number serious forecasters watch even closer, DST, the Disturbance Storm Time Index, measured in nanoteslas, which tracks how much the storm is actually depressing Earth's magnetic field at the equator. A quiet day sits near 0. The most extreme storms on record have dropped past -400. Numbers like that are not abstractions. They translate directly into transformer stress on power grids thousands of kilometers from the poles. And that brings us to the part people always want to skip past to reach what actually happened the last time this scale of event hit us. Go back to September 1859. The Carrington Event, named for the astronomer who documented the flare that triggered it. Telegraph operators across North America and Europe reported their equipment sparking, some lines continuing to send messages even after being disconnected from batteries, powered purely by induced current from the storm overhead. Auroras were reported as far south as the Caribbean. That was a world with almost no electrical infrastructure. A Carrington-scale event hitting today's grid, a grid utterly dependent on transformers, satellites, and precision timing, is the scenario grid operators quietly run tabletop exercises for every year. Now bring that back to the event we are tracking. Nobody is saying this specific CME is Carrington scale. Most are not. But here is the self-correction that matters, the part that keeps this channel honest instead of alarmist. The exaggerated read says the internet will go down and planes will fall from the sky. That is hype, and it is wrong. The real, more concerning read is quieter and slower. It is about high-voltage transformers absorbing geomagnetically induced currents over hours, about GPS-dependent precision agriculture and aviation losing accuracy for a window of time, about high-frequency radio blackouts stranding polar flight routes, not apocalypse. Degradation. Creeping, invisible degradation across systems you rely on without ever seeing them. Consider a more recent, smaller-scale precedent, because it shows the mechanism in miniature. May 2024 brought the strongest geomagnetic storm in over 2 decades, driven by a cluster of CMEs, not just one. Farmers using GPS-guided tractors across the American Midwest reported guidance systems drifting off by inches to feet, enough to ruin precision planting rows. That is a real economic cost, quietly absorbed, rarely covered outside agricultural trade press. Power grid operators in multiple countries shifted to conservative operating postures, deliberately reducing load margins as a precaution. Nothing collapsed, but the system bent visibly under real strain. That is the shape of what a fast CME impact actually looks like on the ground. Not collapse, bend. Now for the conspiracy angle, because it always surfaces around events like this, and it deserves a direct answer rather than a dismissive one. Some corners of the internet frame major CME activity as evidence of deliberate weather engineering, or as a cover story for unrelated grid failures, or worse, as evidence the sun is entering some engineered or unprecedented phase. It is not. The sun runs on an 11-year solar cycle, and we are currently near the peak of solar cycle 25, which means elevated flare and CME activity is expected, tracked, and forecast by NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center, using publicly available satellite data. This is not secret. It is not manufactured. It is measurable, cyclical, and it has happened many times before in recorded solar history. The real story does not need a conspiracy. The real story, the natural cycle colliding with a modern grid that did not exist last time this cycle peaked this strongly, is concerning enough on its own. That is why the actual response here is preparation, not panic. And preparation starts with knowing what to watch. Here are the 3 things worth tracking over the next 2 days. Number 1. Watch the KP index directly through NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center. A sustained KP of 7 or above signals a strong storm actively in progress. KP 9 is the ceiling, and it means the geomagnetic system is under maximum measured stress. Number 2. Watch for G-scale storm warnings. NOAA's geomagnetic storm classification from G1 minor to G5 extreme. G3 and above is where satellite operators and grid engineers start taking active mitigation steps rather than just monitoring. Number 3. Watch your own sky. If you're at mid to high latitude, aurora visibility pushing unusually far south is not just a photo opportunity. It is a visible signature that the storm has arrived and is actively interacting with the upper atmosphere above you. In real time, right now. Connect that back to the shock front we described earlier. Everything downstream. The KP spike, the DST dip, the aurora creeping toward the equator. All of it traces back to that single moment of magnetic reconnection when the CME's field meets ours. One mechanism, many visible fingerprints. Watch the fingerprints, and you are effectively watching the mechanism itself unfold in slow motion. So where does this leave us? Solar cycle 25 is not finished producing events like this one. Forecasters expect elevated activity to continue for months yet, which means this will not be the last fast-moving CME aimed roughly our way this year. The infrastructure risk is not going away either, because the grid modernization needed to fully harden transformers against geomagnetically induced currents is measured in decades of investment, not months. That gap between a fast solar cycle and a slow-moving grid upgrade, is the real story underneath all of this. Not a single dramatic event, but a widening exposure that compounds every time the sun does what it has always done. Watch the index, watch the sky. Those two things, together, tell you almost everything you need to know about where a storm like this one actually stands at any given hour, without needing to wait for a headline to catch up to the data. If this kind of forecasting level breakdown of the systems shaping the planet around you is useful, subscribe, because we track these thresholds as they develop, not after the fact. Like this video if you want more of these deep mechanism-first explainers instead of surface-level headlines. And share it with anyone you know who lives somewhere a grid failure, a GPS drift, or a wide-latitude aurora would actually matter to them directly. We will keep watching the sun. You keep watching the sky.